ESSER 2 training for new schools. I see that we have some folks still popping into our presentation here. So if you're just joining us, if you would please type in your name, the name of the school that you work with, and what your role is in that school. So I have set aside an hour and a half for our discussion today, but I don't think we're going to need that much time. But feel free, since we have a very small group of folks, to stop and ask questions, or feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. And I can actually see those now, so we will stop and answer any of those questions that you might have. So today's a very informal opportunity, so ask as many questions as you want. I've tried to cover as much of the information as I can, but there may be things that you have questions about that I haven't covered. So again, feel free to stop me. I don't mind if you interrupt. And we'll go from there. For those of you who don't know me, I am Tracy Sweet. I'm the Director of Federal Programs at the South Carolina Public Charter School District, and I've been with the district for almost 3 years now. And it is a pleasure to meet all of you and to work with all of you during this new journey. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Let's see. And if you wouldn't mind, please muting yourself until you have a question or we have a discussion about something. That'll help keep down the background noise. All right, so on our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the ESSER 2 background and how this all came about. We'll look at the allowability options, we'll look at allocations, and of course that application process. And I'll go ahead and give you an overview of ESSER 3. So I know you're just starting on these ESSER 2 allocations and applications, but we already have some information about ESSER 3. Some of you joined us for our coffee chat last month, and I went over some of this during that time. So this may be a review for some of you, but hopefully it'll give you the information you need to go ahead and get started on that application. So just to give you a little bit of background information, this past December, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, which we refer to as ESSER, was signed into law, which initiated this additional $54.3 billion for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which is what we refer to as ESSER 2. So you all were not a part of the ESSER 1 allocations that came about, but we did fight for you with the State Department to say, hey, we've got new schools opening up in the fall. They have the same types of emergency situations and needs as a result of the COVID-19, and so we asked if we could also include our new schools, and they graciously agreed to do that. We are still in the process of finding out if they're going to continue to allow us to do that with ESSER 3 funding, and I will let you know about that. I don't see any reason why they would not, but we have to get that permission to make sure. All right, so the ESSER 2 grant extends until September 30th of 2023. So as you are thinking through the needs of your school over the next few years, just know that you have until September 30th of 2023 to expend these funds. Now, we have some schools now, all of our schools that are currently a part of our district received the ESSER 1 funds, and they're encouraging us to spend those ESSER 1 funds before we jump into the ESSER 2 funds. However, you'll find out that sometimes the State Department does not always think about the way in which our charter schools operate when they send out guidance and directions. So you don't really need to worry about that. You don't have to worry about whether or not our schools have spent their ESSER 1 funds before you begin spending your ESSER 2 funds. You wouldn't have any issues with that. I also wanted to mention that the State Department has informed us that they are going to be monitoring us through a tiered system, just like they're going to do with ESSER 1 funds. So we do have a monitoring process that we will have to go through, which will be very much like what you're going to learn about when we start talking about compliance with things like Title I, all the title programs, and so forth. So we will be responsible as a district for monitoring how you use these funds. So initially with ESSER 1, we were given 12 different categories. Really, there were 11 categories, and the 12th category was kind of an other. It was place everything in here that you doesn't really fit somewhere else, but still still is a need as a result of what the COVID-19 has created, the needs that virus has created for us. So with ESSER 2, we have been given 3 additional categories, and these 3 additional categories is where they are encouraging schools to spend the funds. You as a new school will probably want to go back and look at those initial 12 categories. And when I sent out all this information, I sent you a list of all 15 categories, which included these 3 new categories. So I'm not going to go through each one of those 15 categories right now, just because you have that list, and I don't want to be a person who reads a list to you. But if you do have questions about any of those categories, or you have an activity that you want to do, but you're not really sure if it fits into one of those categories, just send me an email or give me a call, and I can help walk you through that. Lots of our schools have done that this year. They've come up with some really creative ways to use the funds, but they're not really sure where it fits. And so again, we can talk about that, and I can help you put it into one of those categories. The new categories under ESSER 2 are the ones that I wanted to focus on a little bit here, because we have been given some additional guidance from the State Department that relates to each one of these categories specifically. So the newest category, the first newest category, has to do with learning loss. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you that the ESSER 3 funding that's coming down the pipe, you have to spend at least 20% of your funds in this new category of learning loss among students. So if you're thinking about some facility repairs or improvements, or improvement of indoor air quality in school facilities, and you're thinking you might receive an additional funding for ESSER 3, which you should, we don't have a definite on that yet, but I don't see any reason why our new schools would not. You may want to think about putting more of that funding into those other 2 categories, and save some of that learning loss for ESSER 3. That's not to say you can't use learning loss, but I just want you to know that when ESSER 3 allocations come out, you are going to be required to spend at least 20% of your allocations on activities that address learning loss as a result of COVID. All right, so a little bit more about these different activities or different categories that they've given us. One of the things I wanted to remind you of is that you want to focus on learning loss among your students. I know you don't have those students in seats yet, but I want you to consider your low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, all of these different subgroups of students. Especially think about your homeless students and children or youth who are in foster care, and what types of issues and learning loss they have experienced as a result of not being in school all of this time. And I realize that many of you are going to be receiving children who came from districts who were not as much face-to-face as some of our schools here in the charter school district as well. So you may have students who have even greater learning loss than other students. But the categories that are specific to this would be administering and using high-quality assessments. So I know you all are going to be looking for, or you may already have started acquiring some of these tools to be able to assess where your students are. Implementing evidence-based activities to meet the comprehensive needs of students. So you are going to have to show that the activities in which you implement are evidence-based. Providing information and assistance to parents and families on how they can effectively support students. So that is another area that falls under learning loss. So any of your parent and family engagement activities where you're teaching parents how to help at home. What can you do at home to address the learning loss that has occurred during this pandemic? Any type of software that you may be using to track student attendance and improve student engagement, that is also allowed under the learning loss activity. Now, the next 2 new activities have to do with the facility repairs and improvements. inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, all of that. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about these two activities separately, because these are not your typical types of activities that would normally fall under federal funding. So this has created a little bit of, I don't want to say issues, but it's created some time constraints with the State Department. So I want to share with you a little bit about those two particular activities a little bit later. But before I jump into those, let's talk about allocations. So your allocations, now the information you see right here, you can see how much the district or the state and then the district received in preliminary allocations and what it's based on. Your allocations are based on the projections that we have at the district. You will be receiving what we call final allocations after your students have been in school for the 5th day. We will be using your 5th day counts to determine what your actual final allocations are. What you have received up to this point are what we call your preliminary allocations. And that's what you've received so far in an email. So again, those are going to be based on your 5th day WPU and the percentage of proviso funding that you receive. And so all of you should have received this chart in an email along with the 12 initial ESSER 1 categories, and then also the additional 3. So the 15 categories in which you can spend this funding. And you also received an application, which we'll talk about a little bit later. All right, so before I move forward, let's see if we have any questions. Let me check. All right, Erin, I think Erin has a question.
Yeah, I do. Because transportation with charter schools is not a given, for the first category that you talked about, preventing or addressing learning loss, can that be used for transportation? Is that considered to be able to get the kids, more free? The model of our school, which they're not there every day. So could that be used for transportation, or is that not appropriate use?
Erin, that is a really great question, and that's one that several of our schools have asked over the past couple of months. We have several schools who have included activities that fall around the area of transportation, such as purchasing mini buses or little minivans. We have not received the approval yet from the State Department. We are awaiting approval. So what we have told them is that we think the answer is yes, but we don't know for sure whether or not transportation is going to be allowed. But I will be able to tell you for sure once we get feedback from the State Department, because again, we have several schools that have transportation tied into their ESSER 2 plans, because most of our schools don't provide transportation. We're not required to provide transportation. And so therefore, we don't have to worry about things like supplanting. And that's another topic that I was going to talk about later, but the ESSER funds, they do not fall under the same guidelines as, say, Title I, II, and so forth when it comes to supplemental versus supplanting. So in other words, if in the absence of these funds, you would still have to do that activity, then you wouldn't be able to do it. ESSER does not fall under that, so we don't have to worry about that. But anyway, the answer is more than likely, the answer is yes. I hope that helped a little bit. I would go ahead and plan for it, Erin. And if we see that the State Department is not going to approve those things, or if they have any specific questions or need more details, then I can reach out to you specifically and say, here's what the State Department's asking for. And again, thank you, Erin. Again, there are some activities or some allowability in the ESSER funds that you don't typically see in a federal grant. So there are a lot of questions when it comes to determining whether or not the State Department will allow something. So what I normally do, if there's something we have a question about, I usually run it by our team or our finance team, and we discuss it first, and then we push it through to the State Department. So I can let you know what they're saying as soon as we get that application feedback from the State Department. Okay. All right, so I don't think I see any other questions at the moment, so we'll go ahead and jump into the application process. So what's next? Now you know what the allowability is. You have your preliminary allocation so that you can go ahead and get started. What's next? So the first step is to work with your planning teams at the school to prioritize those needs based on those 15 categories under ESSER 2. So you're going to be creating activities based on those needs, and you're going to budget using your preliminary allocations. The State Department usually requires for you to be as specific as possible in your activities. Your application, I'll show you that in a few moments, has a couple of examples, but you want to try to answer as many of the who, what, when, where, how, and why questions as possible. In our first ESSER application, they allowed things that honestly I didn't think they would allow in the way in which it was written. Because when we write applications for say Title I, Title II, Title III, 4, and so forth, we have to be very, very specific. Because they're looking into whether or not things are reasonable. So allowable and reasonable are my two favorite federal words. Is it reasonable? Well, first, is it allowable? And secondly, is it reasonable? So when you're thinking about writing activities, you want to make sure you keep those two things in mind: reasonable and allowable. And that is why the State Department needs you to answer as many of the who, what, when, where, how, why questions as possible. An example of that may be you're hiring some additional assistants to work in a summer school program. Well, you would want to include when the summer school program is. So you want the dates of it. How long is the summer school program going to be? Where is the summer school program taking place? And what is the actual expenditure? It's for paying those assistants or paying those teachers who are going to be working in that summer school program. So the State Department is going to want to know what is it an hourly rate? And if it is, how much are they being paid per hour so that they can check the reasonableness of it. Okay, so try to answer as many of the who, what, when, where, how, and why questions as possible. Now, so you're creating these activities based on that preliminary allocation, which came from your projections. But as I mentioned before, when final allocations are released, you will go back and adjust your application based on your new final allocations, and that will come after the 5th day counts. So right now, I do not have a due date for you because we won't be able to submit that to the State Department until after you are officially opened and until after we have that final count for you based on actual students in seats and not projections. So I will touch base with you again once we get closer to that date in the fall and notify you of when your application is due, because for you all as a new school, we will already have an approval. Hopefully we should have an approval of our ESSER 2 application by then. So for you all, I will be submitting an amendment to include you in the plan. So right now we just have a set aside amount in our district plan for our new schools who are coming on board. Okay, so one of the things we also wanted to encourage was for our schools to use ESSER 2 funds to provide emergency leave. The State Department really encouraged that as well, to set aside emergency leave for school employees who've been impacted by COVID-19, so that you can continue to have that face-to-face learning. We have had some schools who have set aside things like substitute funding. Some of our schools, I think we had at least, one or two of our schools who included activities to hire employees who would serve as substitutes on staff. So they would be there every day, not just a call-in sub, to help address some of those needs of students and address that learning loss, or to prevent learning loss if we have some teachers who are absent during that time. Okay, so let's jump into what the application actually looks like. So it is an Excel file, and you should all have that emailed to you already. I included 3 examples there for you. So at the the top of your application, you'll see this is just basic school information. And then you're going to include in the yellow part, starting with line 13, you will start including all of your activities. You can have as many activities as you want. That's up to you, so you can add rows as needed. And the first, under column B, the first section there, you'll have a little drop-down menu that gives you a chance to select which category the particular activity falls under. And if you'll notice, the second tab at the bottom, ESSER 2 categories, you'll, if you click on that, I can't actually click on this because this is a snippet, but when you click on that, it has all of the different categories listed by number, and you can see what that specific category is, and then you'll just come here in the in column B and select which category it fits under. All right, then we have the function code and the object code. So I have already been getting questions about the function code and the object code. Just a little additional information about our federal applications at the state level. We can only use what we call the high level budget codes here. And so for example, you see in those three, 100, 100, that's an instructional salary. 100, 200, those are the benefits that go with that salary. 200, 300, those are support services that fall under purchase services. Now there are some more detailed budget codes that fall within, say, that 100 category that finance can help you with. So I already understand that many of you have or need some additional help in identifying what those detailed budget codes are. For the application, you only need those at the high level. And there's a drop-down menu. So when you click, just like you had for the categories, there's a drop-down menu. So if you click on the drop-down menu, you'll see what each category, what topic or what area that category falls in. But if you're not 100% sure, put what you think it might be, and our finance department will review those and make sure that they are in the correct category. So put what you think for now, and then we'll go back and review those. Now, later on in the year, when you have approval of this application and you start spending these funds, and then you start requesting reimbursement for these funds, then we'll have to dig into those detailed function codes and detailed object codes a little more, because when you ask for reimbursement, our finance department needs to have those reimbursements listed at the detailed function and object code. All right, so again, if you need help with that, I can help you to a certain extent, and then our finance team can definitely help you with that. Under column E, you're going to list what the total amount is for that activity, and then under column F, for that particular activity, you're going to list what that activity actually is. Now, we'll go ahead and tell you, a lot of folks give me a lot of information, but they forget to tell me what the actual expenditure is. So go back and read it, or have someone who has no idea what you're wanting to purchase or how you're wanting to use these funds, have them go back and read it and make sure they know what it is that you're actually going to be spending money on in this activity. Because that can get a little tricky sometimes when I'm reading through and I hear about this great idea, and then I end up with, well, what's the actual expenditure here? What are they actually wanting to purchase? You know, it might be a great program that you're wanting to use, but make sure you let me know exactly what it is that you're purchasing. Okay. All right, what questions do you have about the application so far? Don't think that we have any questions in the chat box so far. So far, so good. Everybody's feeling pretty good about this. I will send you this PowerPoint today so that you can click on all of these links that I'm sharing in the PowerPoint. But the State Department did provide some ESSER 2 updates over the past couple of weeks, so I wanted to provide those to you as well. There is now a frequently asked question document, and it's posted on our website as well as the State Department's website, so you'll be able to click for that link. The State Department has also reminded our schools that you need to ensure that policies and procedures are in place for time and effort for any of your ESSER funding. So, for example, normally you will have policies and procedures for keeping up with time and effort with your federal funds. Well, if you have, let's say you include an activity where you want to pay your teachers who may be out, or any of your staff who may be out due to COVID, you need to make sure that you have a policy and procedures in place for what that looks like, because they're going to go back and look at your specific policies and procedures when it comes to those types of things. Also, if you, another example would be merit pay for compensation, things like that. We had some schools who wanted to provide additional pay to teachers, some bonuses for going above and beyond what their peers did, which is allowable. Across the board bonuses are not allowable, but it is allowable under ESSER 2 to be able to offer those bonuses for going above and beyond. So we had a school that created a rubric to be able to do that. In fact, it was East Point created the first one that we shared with the State Department. And not only did the State Department agree, and they said that was allowable, but they wanted to share it with other schools. So yay for us, right? Yay for East Point. And if you're interested, I can share that with you as well. It's on our website under federal programs as well. So just make sure if you have some activities that fall outside of what your normal policies and procedures would be, that you have those in place. The State Department's monitoring team, those are our auditors. When they come out and start monitoring for ESSER funds, they're going to be looking for those policies and procedures. In addition, they have provided some guidance on ESSER 1 versus ESSER 2. So I wanted to share it with our new schools as well, because you may be talking with schools who have already started implementing activities from ESSER 1. So I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about how they're different. And the biggest area in which they're different is that these new categories that have to do with facilities require a lot more in-depth information and more details than we would have typically provided, say, in ESSER 1 or any of our other federal grants. So again, I mentioned to you earlier that we would dig into these two activities that have to do with facilities a little bit. So 13 has to do with school facility repairs and improvements to help reduce the risk of the virus transmission. And then 14 has to do with any inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, replacement, or upgrade to those projects. So 14 is more about things like ventilation, air conditioning, filters, control, any fans, those HVAC systems, all of those things I really don't know a whole lot about, but those types of things are going to help with air quality and making sure that the school is safe for students to return to in-person learning. Let's see, I think I've already shared. Yes, so they're asking for greater detail in the ESSER 2 spending plan than they did in the ESSER 1. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is because some of you may look at some schools' ESSER 1 plans and say, oh, well, they approved it under ESSER 1. And now they're asking for additional detail. Well, let me explain the reasoning behind that. Once the State Department receives our application, which they now have for the rest of our schools, they have to determine whether those categories 13 and 14 are an altercation level 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to share with you in the next slide what those different levels are and a little more information about those. But they informed us that they may give us what they're calling conditional approval until for those level 2 and 3 requests, because there are additional types of things that the school may have to go to, such as seeking a permit, getting permission from the State Department to add a new wing, those types of things. So here are some special considerations. First of all, you have to justify that the activity is to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. So you can't just add decide we're going to add a wing, an additional wing, because, we've been wanting to do this for years now, and now we have the funding to do it. You have to have a reason that connects to COVID-19. So we do have a couple of schools that are adding additional classrooms so that they can have smaller class sizes. And so that would be a way to prevent the spread of the virus and respond to COVID-19. So you have to be able to justify that. And of course, I've mentioned the word reasonable before in our presentation, but the cost must be reasonable. For example, new construction, you have to have documentation for new construction showing that it is cheaper to build a new wing than repairing the existing one, or cheaper to build a new structure than it is for repairing whatever your existing structure is. So you still have to follow all of those procedures and processes that a school normally would follow if you're spending this ESSER 2 funding. I also have a link to the Davis-Bacon rules. So you can click on that link and take a look at what that is when you're thinking through construction. And also, you cannot claim any funds until you have received full approval from the State Department. So for our new schools, that means you can, once you create these activities and they have been approved, then you can start seeking reimbursement from the district. Okay. You also must follow the EDGAR requirements on construction. If you do not have an EDGAR book, please contact me and we will, Takia's on the line. Takia can send you one. So email myself or Takia and we will make sure you get an EDGAR book. EDGAR, if you're not familiar with EDGAR, it is a book. In fact, I'll hold up I think my latest one's purple. Yeah. So here's the newest EDGAR book. I don't know if you can see it through the thing, but it's purple. I think the last version was orange, but the 5th edition came out in December and we supplied all of our schools with an EDGAR book. So please contact us. I think we still have some in the office that we can send to you. Okay, so I promised I'd show you what these different alterations mean. So here we go. So when you're looking at a level 1 alteration, those are your typical things like replacing the carpet, painting, and so forth. But then when you get into level 2 and 3, that's where you're looking at things like that HVAC replacement, classroom expansion, fire alarm relocation, plumbing, electrical, windows, and doors. And then when you get into level 3, that's where you're looking at those new structures or standalone buildings. And then there's another category that they just call routine maintenance, which is just changing air filters and painting that's not associated with a new construction project or renovation. So there are some links on this page that you can also view to give you more information. And if you have additional questions about new construction, you can contact Vashanta Harris. She is the Chief of Access and Equity at our district. Most of you have probably already been in contact with Vashanta, but she's happy to answer any of those building code questions that you may have. All right, let's see where we are with questions. I don't see any that have been typed into the chat box, but does anyone have a question for me so far?
Tracy, just a follow-up question. I mean, can you ballpark when you think the application is going to be due?
If you can take a look at when your 5th day is, it's probably going to be about a week after a week or so after your 5th day. We have to have probably about a week or 2 from our finance department to take a look at the numbers and be able to determine what your final allocation is. So it's going to be probably a few weeks after your 5th day of school.
And I'm assuming if we are currently under conditional approval for expanded enrollment, that our allocation would increase to match?
We have set aside a certain amount, which totals that chart that I showed you all for each individual school. So we are going to allocate based on your 5th day, that WPU and the proviso percentage that you receive up to that amount. So let's, for example, I don't know that this would happen, but if let's say we have a school that ends up not opening, that funding is going to go back into that pot and be spread across the schools that are the new schools that are left to open.
Okay, just point of clarification. So if we, our situation, I mean, we're hoping that the state is going to, grant that additional funding to serve an additional 48 scholars. So we would go from 148 to 192 initial enrollment. Am I hearing you correctly that the cap is the 79,000 that I saw on the table for us, or would it go up to match those 48?
Well, the cap is for us is going to be the total that we have set aside for all new schools.
Got it.
Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yep.
Hey, Tracy, it's Emily.
Hey, Emily.
Trevor, just to clarify, it is the number of students actually in seats. So on your 5th day, if you have, let's say the enrollment and the funding went through and you have those students, that would be accounted for. And then depending on the size of that pot of money that we have set aside, it would either be spread thinner or that way. So it's really the number of kids in seats.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification, Emily. Good question, Trevor. Any others?
So don't even plan on any reimbursement happening until, I mean, what you think? September, October?
Well, yes. Again, that's going to depend on how soon we can get your application approved, which takes the form of an amendment. So once we get through that 5th day, it'll take a few weeks because I know that you all have 5th day reporting that's due mid-September, I think. So once that information gets to us and our finance department determines what your final allocation is, then all you have to do is take the application that you've been working on, adjust the budget to match what your final allocation is. And then you'll submit those to me. So again, I haven't set a due date because I don't know what that is going to look like yet, but I'm guessing around mid-September, mid or late September. Usually the State Department has been we've had a very quick turnaround on getting approvals. By that time, I think most of the ESSER applications for all the districts will be in and approved, or at least, working toward approval. So it may be may have a little faster turnaround for you all for us to do an amendment. ESSER 1 amendments have been really quick. We've been getting those back pretty quickly. It takes us a while to do because the ESSER application is a paper. I think of it as a paper application because it doesn't run through a system like our Title 1, 2, 3, and 4 do. We have what's called the Grants Electronic Management System that handles all of those grants. So it's very quick, it's very easy, it does all the math for you. Our ESSER application, however, is it's a locked Excel document that we have a hard time, we can't manipulate it or do anything to it. So it has taken my office and finance's office a little longer to do amendments. So I don't want to promise you something and then have it not go through as quickly as you'd like, but we're going to do our best to get that approved for you as quickly as possible. Once you receive word from me via email that your ESSER 2 application has been approved, I will send you a final version of your plan, and you will use that final version of your plan to go ahead and submit reimbursements. And Trevor, I know you are very familiar with that reimbursement process because you were able to receive some Title II funding this year. Those of you who did not take that opportunity, we'll walk you through that reimbursement process. So when we get there, we'll get you through that process, okay? All right, what other questions do you have for us? All right, so let me give you a little bit of information about ESSER 3. Some of you may have seen this during our coffee chat last month, but I loved that John Payne at the State Department referred to ESSER 1, 2, and 3 as some of the Star Wars movies. So we had ESSER 1, which he referred to as New Hope, which was a little over $3 million. And then we had ESSER 2, he referred to that as ESSER Strikes Back, that was authorized in December of 2020, and that was a little over $12 million. Well, ESSER 3, we do not have the allocation for ESSER 3 yet, but they are saying that we should expect more than double our ESSER 2 allocation. So this is going to be the largest federal funding our district or any district has received. So we're looking at a lot of money there. So ESSER 3 has come about as a result of the ARP Act, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. And those funds don't expire until September 30th of 2024. And again, I mentioned a little bit about the fact that you have to set aside the 20% for learning loss in ESSER 3. So we have not received an allocation that I'm aware of yet from the State Department. The State Department is expected to receive over $2 billion in ESSER 3 funding to distribute out to the schools. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, Our State Department handles around 800 million in funding, including special ed and all of our title programs. And so when you think about $2.1 billion, that's a lot of money that our State Department is now going to be able to allocate out to the schools. So we're excited about the opportunity. And again, I mentioned that you have to spend at least 20% of that funding on learning loss, such as after-school programs or summer learning programs. So again, once I have that information from the State Department and we know that we can move forward with our new schools, we will let you know what your status is with that. Our current schools, our current operating schools, do not even have their allocations yet because we haven't received that from the State Department. What we did do, though, was to try to jump ahead of the game a little bit and help some of our schools to think about some ideas or things, activities that you could incorporate as part of that 20%. Because when you think about 20% of that huge amount of funding, you know, more than double what we're going to receive in ESSER, or what we received in ESSER 2, it's probably a good idea to reach out to some folks and ask for help. So that's exactly what I did. I reached out to our team at the district, our SPED team, our SEL coach, you know, all of the folks who work individually with our schools and who know what a lot of their needs are, to ask if they had some ideas, some best practices, some research-based ideas that our schools could use as kind of a jump start to get them started and thinking about the types of activities that they could do. So the next couple of slides, I'm not going to go through and read all of those, but those just give you some ideas of some things that you could possibly do with the funding in the area of learning loss. So we have an area for academic. Our SPED directors got together and sent lots of resources, so you can also contact them. They have lots of really good ideas. The links that you see here are some links that the State Department also sent out with how to respond to learning loss in this pandemic in regards to your special ed students. So lots of good ideas there. We also reached out to Susan Howard, who is our ESOL contact. And so she is putting together some ideas for how you can address those. They used to be called ELs, but the language has now changed again. And they're called MLs, which I think stands for multi language learners, I think is what the term is. So she put together a list of things that would be ideal to spend the funding in regards to your ML students. Our SEL coach provided a list of ideas. She even named some specific programs, some SEL programs that are aligned to pre-K through 12, mental health counselors, you know, all of those different things that we may not think about when we're just sitting down and trying to create activities. So I don't want you all to get in this habit, I guess you could say, of just throwing the money at activities. Really think about what your needs are moving forward. There's a recorded session from last month's coffee chat, which talks a little about needs assessments. You're welcome to go back and look at that. It's on our website. And we're looking into the opportunity to provide even more sessions for you on how to complete needs assessments and really look at your data to determine what your needs are. And Trevor, that's another good point to make when it comes to thinking about the timeline, because once your students actually arrive and you have the students you know for sure you're going to have, you know, I know you're probably going to need some time to look at what your specific needs are in regards to learning loss. So it may be that you're having to implement, you know, some online opportunities to determine, you know, to get a baseline of where your students are. So that's another area in which we need to give you time to be able to determine what your needs are and then decide how you want to address those needs. I'll be honest with you, I've worked at the State Department, I've worked with Title I for quite some time, and with our federal programs, what I see a lot I saw this across the whole state, I saw folks coming up with ideas that they wanted to implement just because, oh, great, I saw this happening at another school, I really want to do this. but it didn't really meet the specific needs of those students in that particular year. It was just a cute idea. It's kind of like teaching. You know, I started my career, spent in a first grade classroom, spent 10 years teaching. And one of the big mistakes I made was I would find this really cute idea and say, oh my gosh, my kids would have so much fun with this. This would be a great activity. We can create a display for this outside the room. But then I had to stop and go back and say, wait, what does this actually have to do with the needs of my students? And sometimes I see that same thing happening with activities for federal programs. We find these really great activities we want to do that we think are going to make a difference, but did we really look at the needs of our students? Did we really analyze the needs and then create activities to meet those needs? Or did we just find this cute activity that we want to do? So really think about that and think about the needs of your students when you're trying to determine how you want to spend these funds. All right, so I think we have a couple of comments. Trevor said, love the collaboration and sharing of activities. Thank you, Trevor. We may even have more of these to come. So we're still thinking of ways in which we can help you. Again, you guys have that autonomy. You decide what's going to work best for your school. But we just wanted to provide you with at least a list of ideas of things that maybe we've seen work in the past. Okay, so when is the effective start date of ESSER 3 funding? We have not received those allocations yet, so we don't know. I don't know if those are going to come out, after this fiscal year has started or what's going to happen there. So we just have to wait until we receive additional information from the State Department on that. We don't know. The only thing we do know is the end date, and that was September of 2024 for ESSER 3. September of 23 for ESSER 2. So you have another year for ESSER 3 funds. All right, so bullet 2, additional counselors. Can that additional one be uncertified one, tackling the same mission, role, and responsibilities? Yes, if you have an additional counselor that you are wanting to hire. Now, I am not an expert on what the certification requirements are for school counselors. You may want to reach out to Emily Baker in regard to that. So that she can give you information about what is required for the school to have. Emily Paul, I think, can also share some of that information with you.
Tracy, what was the question?
It's about adding additional counselors. So I was telling them that I'm not the expert on the certifications that are required for counselors, but the question was, can that additional counselor be an uncertified one, tackling the same mission, role, and responsibilities?
It depends. Email me your ideas and we can talk about it.
Yes, so email to Emily Paul and she can tell you about what's required, or Emily Baker as well. Okay. All right. So let's see what else we have here. Okay, so here are some other ideas. I think I mentioned that floating substitute, having a floating substitute to float around so that you have them on hand daily. They know what's going on in the school. They know the processes and procedures. And if we don't know what's going to happen with COVID and what the future holds, but some of our schools decided to implement that as well. And of course, making sure you have plenty of technology for your students to use, those incentives for educator performance, and parent and family engagement meetings and events. This is an area that's near and dear to my heart. So if you're looking for ideas or creative ways to involve your parents in your school, while also keeping in mind that we are still living in a pandemic, touch base with me. We have had some schools that came up with some really creative ways to hold some of their meetings with parents. So you'll find out that we have really created an environment of collaboration among schools. Please join us if you'd like for our monthly coffee chats. I know you're not officially open yet, but we'd still love to have you. We oftentimes will have sharing sessions where schools will talk about the innovative things that they're doing in their schools and what impact that has had on student and parent engagement or student achievement. Okay, so I have listed lots of resources here for you so that you can browse our federal programs. And as always, if you have questions, I'll put my contact information up here and you can contact me at any time. Also wanted to remind you that there is an evaluation survey. If you will, please complete it. Let me know how we're doing. Let me know what I can do to better meet your needs as a new school. There may be things that I just haven't thought about as a new school opening. Then I would love to have your feedback. What other questions do you have before we close our meeting today? Okay, so I think some of you may be thinking about questions. If you would please, as an exit slip, just let me know how things are going. Leave a comment. If it could be a celebration, something exciting happening at your school. Let me know what you're excited about. Feel free to leave any questions. I'm going to hang on the line here for a few minutes in case you do have individual questions. But I'm going to officially stop recording our meeting now. There we go.